Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Leonard. I am the COO of Sability, and I hope you've been enjoying the event so far. And I want to welcome you to this session titled The Basic Elements of Workforce Management Systems. Whether a company is in the hospitality, healthcare, retail, or manufacturing industries, it has a need to schedule its employees, track what they did when they came to work, and make sure that they pay them correctly for that work. And the software applications that support these basic business needs form the basis of what we call today the workforce management software industry. Over the next hour, we will look at the basic components of these systems, define them, and discuss typical variations based on industry needs, employer and employee types, company sizes, and technology platforms. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of software applications that could fall under the WFM umbrella. Some are quite basic and are fit only for small or simple organizations, while others are very comprehensive and may offer solutions that are industry specific. This session will not discuss any specific vendor solutions, but rather provide an overview of the common features and options that most of these solutions offer. When we are finished, you'll have a good working vocabulary of the industry terms and features that are present across the majority of workforce management solutions. So let's get started. At the highest level, workforce management systems can be broken down into different modules of functionality. The term module here is not intended to imply separation of these features from one another or any kind of all or nothing selection that must be made. In fact, when many companies implement these solutions, they implement some or all, but in most cases, they dabble a little bit in each of them. However, it is important for us to have some type of a framework for our discussion. So we're going to break the application down into the following modules. First is time and attendance, used to track employee work and calculate their pay. Next is integration, which automates the sharing of data between the workforce management solution and other solutions in the organization. Next, we'll talk about reporting and analytics, which provides a mechanism for extracting usable data from the system's database. Next will be self-service, which includes features that automate common business processes. Then we'll talk about scheduling, which determines when employees should work and what they should be doing. We'll then talk about labor planning, which is a data feed that's used for advanced scheduling. And finally, we'll talk about absence management, which is additional automation of the tracking and management of employee leave and time away from work. So now that we understand the major components, let's dive right in. First up is time and attendance. In many ways, time and attendance is at the heart of all workforce management solutions. Time and attendance solutions were the first applications developed by companies to begin the process of workforce management automation. In fact, many people still use the terms workforce management and time and attendance interchangeably. However, as I'll show you, workforce management includes much more than just time and attendance tracking. In general, time and attendance refers to the tracking of whether an employee came to work, what time they worked, what they did while they were there, and how the employee should be paid for the work they performed. To further discuss this topic, we'll break it down into even smaller components. We're going to talk about data collection, time codes, timesheets, pay rates, pay rules. So let's dig a little bit deeper into each of these areas. Data collection refers to a method of electronically capturing an employee's work times and activities. Prior to these technology solutions, someone, either the employee or their supervisor, was responsible for writing down the time the employee came to work, when they took breaks, and when they went home. Unfortunately, this method of data gathering was very cumbersome and often open to error or fraud. With workforce management solutions these days, there are a number of different technologies that can be used to not only record the time in and out and break times, but also to collect other information such as the job being performed, the quantity of products produced, etc. Some of the most common data collection options are employee badge readers. These devices use barcodes or proximity badges to identify the employee and record the time and data that's entered. Biometric devices do the same function as employee badge readers, but they do away with the need for the badge. Instead, they used fingerprints, hand geometry, or even the pattern of the veins in your fingers to identify who the employee is. Adoption of this method has been growing rapidly over the past years as this technology became more robust and the elimination of buddy punching received more attention. In case you didn't know, the term buddy punching refers to the act of one employee clocking in another employee for work even though the second employee is actually absent. Another data collection option is IVR, or interactive voice response. This method uses the company's phone system for data collection. Employees dial a number, enter their employee PIN, and press 1 to clock in, 2 to clock out, etc. IVR now even offers security features that guarantee that the employee is calling from the proper location using caller ID, as well as biometric validation in the form of voice print identification. Each of the options we've discussed so far has some associated cost with it, either for purchasing devices or software to capture the data. For that reason, most WFM vendors have also deployed a web clock or a clock page option. This is a simple web page in the application that acts like a punch clock. Employees access this page through the internet. Thus, there's no cost associated with deploying this except that it has to be displayed on an employee's PC. Finally, an emerging trend is the use of mobile devices. With the proliferation of these devices, everyone seems to have one, workforce management vendors have been looking for ways to leverage this new technology. Some are beginning to offer mobile applications that allow for data collection. These solutions started as very simple pages, but now offer more advanced features such as GPS location capture, which determines where the employee was when they clocked in. So as you can see, there are a lot of options for gathering this data, and the right choice depends on each organization's needs and technology. The next component of time and attendance are time codes. Both pay and absence codes are the simplest form of grouping employee time. Examples include regular time, overtime, or sick, which is an unpaid absence. This may seem rather simple, but even the choices of these codes will dictate the level of detail a company can expect to get in reporting time out of their system. Every solution offers its own flavor of timesheet formats, layout, and information. But I think we all know what an employee timesheet is. It is the comprehensive record of an employee's work and absences for a given pay period. However, even with all these variations, timesheets usually come in two basic flavors, differentiated by the way the time is captured. First is a punch, detail, or in and out timesheet, which requires that the actual punch times be provided. This is the method that is typically used with data collection and employee clocks. But sometimes, even the supervisor employee is allowed to just key this information into the in and out fields. It is used mostly with hourly employees who have strict start and end times related to their schedule, and where the actual time of day that the time was worked may have an impact on how they're paid. The second type of timesheet is elapsed time. This format does not use data collection for in and out. It's used mostly by salary or professional employees who are more concerned with tracking absences and recording time against projects or jobs. In many cases, these employees are set up on auto-pay, where the timesheet is automatically populated with their default hours, and they report only the exceptions or changes from the default. Regardless of the timesheet format used, they'll almost always include a number of additional fields used for tracking the employee's work details. These types of fields may include things such as pay codes, absence codes, job codes, departments, projects, customer order numbers used for charging labor back to the customer, work order numbers, absence reasons, and overtime reasons. Most of them will also provide a place for the supervisor to include notes related to what happened during the day. While this isn't a comprehensive list, I think it gives you a good idea of the types of information that would typically show up in a timesheet. Next, we'll talk about pay rates. You'll still find some systems today that don't include pay rates and track only hours grouped by pay code. But most systems these days do include pay rates, and there are two main reasons why companies want this information in their workforce management system. First, there may be logic involved in determining the correct rate of pay for different circumstances. So automating this logic ensures that it's applied consistently and accurately. Secondly, having the pay rate also allows for real-time calculation of gross labor costs, rather than having to wait till the end of a pay period to get this information out of the payroll system. This real-time labor cost data is very useful in managing the business. Because different businesses have their own pay methods, applications have had to develop multiple methods that can be used a la carte. Depending on the system, pay rates may be supported ranging from simple employee base rates to rates by job, or even incentive pay rates where employees are paid per unit produced rather than the actual hours worked. Furthermore, there may be multiple possible rates that you could be paying an employee at any given time, and there are rules that can be configured to determine which rate is appropriate. For example, an employee may continue to receive the pay associated with their regular job even when working temporarily in a lower paying position. However, the same employee may receive a higher rate if they're working in a higher paid job for more than a certain number of hours per day. Now, this is just one example of the kinds of pay rate rules that exist, and I can assure you that the companies and unions have become quite creative in making up their own rules over the years. One of the key functions of the time and attendance system is to apply federal, state, company, and union pay rules to the employees' timesheets. There's an endless list of potential rules, but the most common ones are shown here. There's rounding, which determines the increments in which employees will be paid. Grace periods determine the amount of time around the scheduled start and end times for the day that the employee will be paid as if they arrived on time. Overtime and double time exist, but there are many different permeations. There's daily overtime, weekly overtime, and even pay for your 6th or 7th consecutive workday. Holiday pay consists of not only determining how to pay someone if they work on a holiday, but also whether or not they're eligible to receive the holiday pay when they're not working that day. Meals are a big topic and include things like determining whether or not someone should be paid or unpaid for their lunchtime, whether they should receive a meal penalty for missing a legal meal break, or whether or not meals can be automatically deducted without employees punching in and out. Finally, there are premiums, which come in many different flavors, but typical ones are shift differentials, which pay an extra amount of pay per hour for time worked on maybe second or third shift. There are weekend premiums, such as a Sunday premium, which would pay a lump sum for working on a weekend or a preferable weekend day. And then there are hazard premiums, where employees are paid an extra amount per hour for working in some type of a dangerous, dirty, or somewhat undesirable condition. When all these rules are applied to the employee's timesheet, the result is the calculation of the employee's gross pay. Note that this is a key term. In general, all time and attendance systems calculate gross pay, while leaving the task of doing net pay to the payroll system. Net pay is the reduction of the employee's gross pay by taxes, withholdings, and etc. So that concludes our review of time and attendance. Now let's talk about integration. As you can imagine, the value of the time and attendance system would be greatly enhanced by the availability of integration points to automatically share data between time and attendance and other business systems. This reduces the need for double entry of information and eliminates any differences between the systems. The most common integration points include the HR system, which shares the employee master data and employees' accrual balances with the workforce management system. External scheduling systems may provide the employee's scheduled start and end times and also scheduled absences to time and attendance. As we've discussed, the workforce management system will export the gross pay and sometimes employee accrual balances to the payroll system for additional processing. Work order or project systems will also supply information back and forth with the workforce management system, including employee assignments to work on those projects and available budgets for hours to be charged against them. And in some cases, the general ledger system is directly interfaced with the workforce management system, providing real-time labor distribution and budget variance reporting, as opposed to waiting to get that information from the payroll system. In addition to all those integration points, there are multiple integration technologies that are typically in play. Flat files are the most common even today. They provide basic batch synchronization of information from one system. It's exported and provided and then loaded into the second system. Most of these use some type of file transfer of either FTP or secure FTP to move files from one system to another. However, with the proliferation of this technology, many solutions now offer tools that automate the entire end-to-end process of extracting data, transferring it, mapping it, and then importing it into the secondary system. Another technology is web services. Web services uses internet technologies and internet protocols to provide real-time data synchronization from one application to the other, thus eliminating the need for batch files and the transfer and reloading of flat files. Finally, there are third-party middleware applications that allow for real-time or very close to real-time synchronization. These applications sit between the parent and the child application and manage the delivery of information from one to the other. An example of this is IBM's MQ series messaging system. Now let's talk about reporting and analytics. With all of this valuable information in the system, it's understandable that a company wants to be able to get the information back out and use it to run their business better. In most workforce management systems, there are a few different levels of reporting. First, what we would call standard reports. These are typically tabular reports that pull data directly out of the system with groupings and subtotals, but there's very little analysis of the data going on. Examples of these types of reports include employee absence history reports, departmental labor costs, overtime usage by department, or project hours used. Systems also provide ad hoc reporting. These tools allow users to build their own reports of information so that they can see the information organized the way they want. These tools are very beneficial since oftentimes the standard reports won't fit all of a company's needs. Finally, the highest level of reporting is often called business intelligence or analytics. These tools provide trend analysis and crunch through a lot of computations of the data. Cubes of information allow you to quickly look at relationships between different factors. In the past, BI tools were often sold separately, but more often, workforce management vendors are now bundling these tools into their systems to allow for greater data analysis. The next module to discuss is self-service. When we look at these pictures, it's easy to understand the concept of self-service. It means that a transaction that used to require interaction between two or more people has been simplified so that the consumer can complete it without assistance. For workforce management systems, the concept of self-service is the same. Interactions between an employer and their manager have been automated so that they can be processed without the need for the other person being present. And at the heart of many self-service solutions is the concept of workflow. The workflow determines the order in which information is captured and routed throughout the organization. The classic example of self-service and workflow is the employee time-off request. Let's say that this year I was scheduled to work the 7 a.m. shift on the Monday after the Super Bowl, and I want to make sure that next year the same thing doesn't happen. I can submit a PTO request, and from that, the system can validate different rules, such as, is the day I'm requesting a PTO blackout date? Luckily for me, it's not. Next, perhaps there's a rule that checks to see if there are already too many people scheduled off. And again, luckily, I'm the first one to try and ask off for next year's Super Bowl Monday. Once the system has determined that I passed all of the automated rules, it can send that request to my supervisor for final approval. And if my supervisor approves it, the system will automatically email me to let me know that it's been approved and simultaneously update my schedule for a year from now so that I know I'm scheduled off that day. Other examples of self-service activity include employee status changes, which is a transaction that occurs mainly between the manager and the HR department. For example, requesting a permanent job change for an employee. There's also a transaction between employees, such as shift trading, which allows employees to self-serve and identify that they're going to work each other's shifts and would automatically update each other's schedules so that managers would know who is scheduled to be coming to work. And then there are other transactions between managers and employees, such as posting and accepting of overtime, where managers can put out a message for employees so they will know that overtime is available, potentially on a first-come, first-served basis. Now that you have a good idea of what self-service is about, let's talk about scheduling. Scheduling is all about determining when employees should work and what they should be doing. So that sounds easy enough, right? In reality, though, there are many different levels of complexity of scheduling needs for different businesses across many different industries. The scheduling method depends greatly on the mixture of full-time and part-time employees, as well as the consistency and repeatability of the work that needs to be performed. We will consider 3 different scenarios to illustrate the levels of complex scheduling tasks that face different businesses. Let's consider first a food processing plant that has 3 assembly lines, one making cookies, one making chips, and a third one making chocolates. Many facilities like this divide the day into 3 shifts, A shift for processing food, B shift for processing, and C shift for sanitation, which is when a team of people comes in and cleans up the factory so that the following A shift can begin again. So, given this situation, the plant has a fairly regular pattern of shifts and jobs that need to be performed. And they probably have a high degree of full-time employees that work on predefined shift patterns. This type of scheduling need is fairly basic and is usually supported by even the most simple time and attendance workforce management systems. However, what if the same factory operates only one assembly line at a time, based on the need for different orders from customers? So, around Valentine's Day, the factory may be dedicated to making only chocolates, whereas around other times of the year, they would be making more chips or cookies. To make this even more complex, each assembly line may have its own need for a different distribution of workers, whereas to make chocolate, we need only 6 line workers, but we need 3 forklift drivers and 2 maintenance technicians. This demand scheduling is the medium tier of schedule complexities that you will run into. And I'm sure you can see that there's a lot of value in the workforce management system automating the decision of how many employees should work at any given time based on what's being made. So now let's consider the most advanced scheduling. Let's consider a 24-screen movie theater in a large suburban mall. If you think about a movie theater, they have jobs like ticket takers, ushers, and concession stand employees. And they typically have a mix of full-time and part-time employees. The part-time employees are mostly made up of high school students. Another type of employee is the projectionist, or the person that runs the movie projector. This happens to be a unionized full-time position, and there are rules governing how much these employees should be paid and how they can be scheduled. Add to this the fact that the number of employees that need to work is greatly dependent on the number of people who will be attending a movie at any given time. If there are only 50 people in the movie complex at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, you wouldn't need more than one ticket taker, one usher, and one concession clerk. Staffing any more than that would be a big waste of money. Thus, it takes some pretty complex analysis to determine the schedule for every single week, day, and hour. When you consider the different factors that go into the schedule, there are things such as employee availability. We know that these part-time students often have complex schedules that have to be accommodated, such as sports games and other school events. There's scheduled vacation for full-time employees. Then we need to factor in the hour-by-hour forecast of how many people should be attending the movie theater at any given time. Then we have to compare that to the union rules for the projectionists. We also have to correspond to child labor laws, which dictate that students can only work a certain number of hours and especially are restricted on school nights. And finally, many companies will apply a fixed labor budget that has to be adhered to, so that over a given month or week, only a certain number of dollars can be spent on employee labor. Taking all of this variability of the employees and the demand into consideration, and then processing, requires schedule optimization. This is the industry term for the most complex types of scheduling. As you can imagine, setting up a system to incorporate all these factors and generate the perfect schedule can be quite a task. That is why the schedule optimization module can often take as long or longer than the time and attendance side to configure and get working properly. Now that we've talked about advanced scheduling, let's talk about labor planning. As you step back from the scheduling algorithm, you will find another subset of solutions that supply raw data that's necessary for schedule optimization. In the past, these solutions were often standalone or homegrown, but more and more you find them as being offered as parts of the workforce management solution. There are two interrelated modules that fall into this category, and both were on our previous slide. The first is labor budgeting, and the other is the labor forecast. Labor budgeting provides tools to automate the computation and the collaboration required to determine the labor budget within an organization. If a company manages its schedules based on labor budget constraints, there's usually not an even distribution across the organization. For example, a national clothing retailer may have 100 stores in different markets around the U.S., but on any given day, the labor budget would not be divided equally. That's because some stores are small locations inside malls, while others are large standalone operations, and others might be outlet locations that have a different staffing demand. So given the size of each store, the expected customer foot traffic, and its expected sales per week, the corporate office may issue a labor budget that can't be violated for each individual store. For many companies, the process of analyzing budgets and eventually locking them in is an iterative one that happens between the corporate offices and individual store management. The company may issue the first budget, which is then sent to the store managers for review. The store may then submit requests for edits based on changes it expects in its business, and so forth and so on. Then eventually, the budget is locked in and becomes a scheduling constraint. The other labor planning module is labor forecasting. Forecasting is about predicting the demand for labor based on historical data and other known factors. For example, in our movie theater example previously, we needed the forecast to tell us how many people will be attending the movies at any given time, such as between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. on a given day. In that way, the schedule optimization engine could tell us how many ticket takers, concession clerks, and etc. would need to be working during that hour. It's a pretty complex task to accurately predict the future. It's usually another complex process that crunches multiple parameters to decide the final forecast. Some of the factors that would be considered in our example would be historical ticket sales that may be analyzed for trends across the week and showing possibly that more people attend movies on Saturday nights than any other night. There also may be a trend of attendance based on the types of movies that are being played, whether they're rated R or rated PG. We also know that the attendance is impacted by the seasons of the year. Perhaps in the north during the winter, people tend to stay home because it's cold out. And conversely, in the summer, in the south, people want to be outdoors and don't go to the movies as much. We also know that the distribution of attendance to movies is affected by the day of the week, or whether it's a weekend or versus a weekday. Of course, we could all predict that on the opening night for big movies, attendance would spike considerably. Other factors could include whether or not 2D versus 3D movies are being shown. And of course, we all know that economic conditions would affect movie attendance from one year to the next. In the end, it's the labor forecasting module's responsibility to take all of this information and eventually determine what it thinks is the forecast for attendance by hour on any given day. Of course, our example as a movie theater is a good one at describing the challenges and factors that I think we can all relate to. But the same idea applies to hospitality, retail, gaming, or even healthcare. Really, anywhere there are multiple drivers of demand that varies greatly between different time segments. The last module we'll discuss is absence management. This is another solution that has grown out of the basics of time and attendance, but with increasing complexity has come to be considered its own module. Time and attendance systems always tracked individual employee absences, but absence management grew out of the need to consider more of the whole absence history. Some of the major features of absence management include attendance points and discipline. Many companies, especially those with labor unions, have implemented attendance discipline systems to fairly administer their policies. When employees have an unplanned absence, such as a sick day or a tardy, they accumulate attendance points. Then, within a rolling 12-month window, if an employee hits, let's say, 5 points, they would receive a verbal warning. And if they continue and then eventually hit 10 points, this may be escalated to a written warning or even final termination. The attendance points and discipline modules automate the computation of these, and application and administration of it is greatly eased. It's important to note that attendance points modules can also be used for positive things. Many companies also use them to reward perfect attendance for employees as well. Another component of absence management is the accrual engine or entitlements engine. This was traditionally something that was computed in the HR payroll system, but more and more is showing up in workforce management systems as well. Again, the reason is that workforce management systems work on a real-time basis, and it's important to be able to deduct balances or compute employee future accruals when trying to determine things like scheduled time off for the future. The last part of absence management is FMLA tracking. Tracking of FMLA started off as just tracking the FMLA balance, but now absence management solutions track the entire business process around FMLA, including notifying employees and employers when an absence might qualify for FMLA, monitoring the application process through the HR department, and then, once the leave is approved, bundling consecutive absences that are covered under the same qualifying event for reporting and receiving the appropriate paperwork and sign-off from employees and their managers. So that's it. We've reviewed the major components of a workforce management solution. I know we've talked about a lot of things in a short period of time, so let's do a short recap. We've talked about time and attendance, which records when employees come to work and how much they should be paid. We've talked about self-service, which provides workflow and automates business processes. There's reporting and analytics, which provides different levels of reporting, automation, and ad hoc reporting, and computations. There's integration, which eases the burden of getting information from one business system to the other. There's scheduling, which at its most basic form helps to determine what time employees should work, but in more advanced forms determines when employees should work, who should be working, and what jobs they should be performing across complex distributions throughout the day. There was labor planning, which were modules that fed into the labor scheduling optimization for budgeting constraints and determining the labor forecast. And finally, there was absence management, which included modules such as attendance points, the accruals engine, and FMLA leave case management. I'll also remind you that the naming and grouping of these modules is not an industry standard. Individual vendors may have their own conventions. These components represent roughly 80% of the features that most solutions have in common, but in no way should it make you think that all workforce management systems are the same. In fact, there are plenty of major differences between different solutions, including the technology choices they've made, the level of service and pricing models they offer, the vertical industries that they support, and the overall fit and usability of their solution. It's my hope that being armed with this basic vocabulary, you will be able to speak more intelligently with industry leaders and ask questions of your vendors, and in the end, find a solution that is right for you. I thank you, and we'll open the floor for questions. It doesn't appear that we have any questions, so thank you and have a nice afternoon.